After a week off to bring us another world-building short, RWBY returned with a Volume 4, Episode 4 entitled Family, and what an apt title it is. A lot happened in this episode, and while it didn't really amount to anything here while it was just setting up future plot lines, it was all very thought-provoking, and I really appreciated that. First of all, I want to start out with the farm boy. We found out his name is Oscar. He appeared back in the first episode of the season as well, but I didn't talk about him there because there wasn't anything to talk about other than the fact that he was there. But here he was featured again, and now we have some idea of why he's being featured at all. Because Ozpin is in fact alive, and somehow he is there in the boy's barn, though we can't see him. He seems to be communicating with the boy through a mirror. And that's it. That's the entire scene. We learn nothing more than that. And while we can speculate about what this means, one of the interesting things about RWBY is that the limitations of people's abilities within the RWBYverse are not very well defined. So we can't just say, oh, I know how this aspect of their world works, so this must be what's happening here. No, we're going to be completely surprised by whatever this is, and I'm really excited for that. Having addressed that, now let's move on to Yang's plot in this episode. We do get more about her in this episode. And while I still think the pacing of this season could be a little bit better, I think that the Yang stuff from this episode could have been moved to a later episode and would have felt more natural. In terms of pacing, we do get immediate development of her plotline. I assume that they were going to put this off for a little bit longer to make it seem like more time had passed and things had sunk in more, but they just rush right into it. Yang wakes up one night and sees that Tai has over some professors from Beacon, and she makes her presence known, and there's some awkwardness to it, but then they actually start talking about her arm and what happened. And it's kind of clear that everyone in the room other than Yang is a little tipsy, at the very least, in one case quite literally. And then Tai says the most awful thing. And the professors are shocked, but surprise, surprise, Tai knows his own daughter, and that's exactly what she needed to hear to start opening up about her fears. She is a very direct person who believes that harshness can be used to increase the impact of a worthwhile argument. We've seen that time and time again, and Tai knows that about her, and so he does the same thing to get her to start talking about how she's been feeling. Because, again, I want to point out that there has been a time jump here, and throughout that entire time jump, she's not talked about her arm at all. So she tells them that she's afraid, and she tells them that she feels normal now without the arm. And I loved this scene because no one in the room tells her that she shouldn't feel afraid. No one tells her that she's wrong to feel afraid. But these three men are warriors. They have spent their entire lives overcoming fear. And they know that Yang, at least before she lost her arm, wanted that same kind of lifestyle, and that she's never going to be able to have it unless she can overcome this fear. So they encourage her to put the arm on. They encourage her to learn to use it and to overcome that fear through action, which is what Yang is best at. And I'm sure that if she relearned how to fight and then decided that she didn't want that huntress's lifestyle anymore, that they'd respect that. But they don't want her to just give up without having at least tried to reclaim that part of herself. Because if she doesn't try, she'll never know. Like I said, it felt a bit rushed because they put this so close to the introduction of this plotline. But if they had only moved this plot point to the next episode and hadn't actually expanded on the time that they spent on it, I honestly wouldn't feel that way about it, so I can't really complain. And I gotta admit, it was cool to see her step outside of the house at the end of the episode with the new arm ready to try. But even more interesting than Yang's plot here was Crow's. Turns out Crow has been following RWBY and her group and protecting them from threats that he feels like they might not be ready to take on. Creatures that intend to ambush them, I would imagine groups too large for them to handle themselves. He knows that they are feeling things and they need to go on this journey to work through those feelings, and that heck, they might actually be able to get something done. But he also knows that they're young and inexperienced and that they aren't ready for what the world can throw at them yet. So he's made the choice to stay with them and protect them, but without actually letting them know that he's there, so that they still feel the same sense of accomplishment that they would if they managed to pull this off on their own. Which makes me feel a whole lot better about the fact that the villains are seemingly coming for them, because now Crow's going to be watching over them. He's going to be able to help when that actually happens. But we get very little of RWBY and her group in this episode. We follow Crow instead, and it seems that Crow has more problems than just RWBY and her group, because Crow's sister, Raven, Yang's mother, has sought out an audience with him, and everything she says is built up for this season. Everything. I'm not going to go into detail about it. There are things that she wants, things that she needs, things that she wants to know. We learn a little bit more about her background, where she comes from, who she is. But they're just foundation stones. Nothing of real substance is learned here. So instead I want to talk about very briefly how much like Yang she is. If I'm not mistaken, and I could be because I'm not wholly immersed in the RWBY fandom, but if I'm not mistaken, Yang never really got to know her mother. She wanted to find her in part so that she could know her. So it is striking to see how similar they are as people. Not only does Raven look a lot like Yang and have very similar mannerisms to Yang, she thinks in a similar way to Yang. And the scene earlier between Yang and Tai, where Tai got Yang to open up by being very direct and blunt with her, I guarantee that was put in this episode with Raven's scene specifically so that we could see a correlation between the two characters. They both value strength, they both value bluntness, they both value directness. The only real difference between the two of them that we can glean from this brief characterization of Raven is that Yang cares less about herself and more about protecting others, whereas Raven seems to be pretty much the opposite. I really enjoyed this episode. It was mostly set up, as I said. The Oscar plot, the Yang plot, the Raven plot, they were all basically set up and nothing else. But I still really enjoyed this. It, as I said before, was very thought-provoking. It introduced us to a lot of new possibilities. Enough so that despite the fact that nothing really happened in this episode, I still felt satisfied after having watched it, which is all you can really ask for from an episode of this type. But as usual, guys, I ask, what did you think of this episode? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.